There's a quiet epidemic happening in millions of bodies right now, and most people don't even know it's taking place. Muscle isn't just about strength or appearance. It's your body's metabolic engine. It helps regulate blood sugar, protect your bones, stabilize your joints, and even defend your brain against cognitive decline. But what's shocking is how quickly and silently it can begin to vanish. Studies show that after age 30, we begin losing up to 3 to 5% of our muscle mass per decade. And after 60, that rate accelerates dramatically, leading to a condition called sarcopenia, age muscle loss. But here's the part most people miss. This isn't just about aging. It's also about missing key nutrients, especially one specific food group that could dramatically slow or even reverse this decline. Now, I want to be very clear, this is not a hype-driven superfood speech. What we're going to explore is based on hard science. Clinical trials, cellular biology, and neuroscience all point to the same thing. Your muscles require more than protein. They need specific anabolic signals that come from what you eat, when you eat it, and how your body is primed to absorb it. And surprisingly, most people are skipping the one food that may be the most essential to preserving muscle tissue, strength, and even neural drive. It's a food that not only feeds your muscles, it fuels the brain-muscle connection, supports mitochondrial health, and triggers the very pathways responsible for rebuilding tissue. So if you've noticed your legs feel weaker walking upstairs, or you're not recovering as quickly after workouts, or even if you're simply concerned about staying strong, mobile, and sharp as you age, this conversation is for you. Because here's what the research shows. Muscle loss isn't inevitable. And in many cases, it's not just about how much you're lifting or how much protein you're getting. It's about whether your body is receiving the right signals to build and preserve lean mass. In today's talk, we're going to unpack the neuroscience, physiology, and nutrition behind this process. And most importantly, we'll zero in on the food you might be missing that could make all the difference. Here's what we'll cover: why muscle loss starts earlier than you think, and the hidden role of your nervous system. The one overlooked food that sends a powerful anabolic signal to your muscle. How this food impacts mTOR, the key growth switch inside your cells. The reason timing, especially around sleep and exercise, matters for muscle retention. Why your gut health influences how well this food works. And finally, a practical eating protocol you can start using today to build or preserve muscle, even if you're over 60. Let's dive in, not just into what builds muscle, but into how your brain, gut, and muscles are constantly talking to each other, and how you can optimize that conversation, starting with one simple change in your diet. When we talk about muscle loss, the first image that often comes to mind is shrinking muscle tissue. Smaller arms, thinner legs, weaker grip. But what if I told you the real breakdown often starts much higher up, in the brain? Before muscle fibers begin to atrophy, there's often a drop in something called neural drive, the brain's ability to activate your muscles through the spinal cord and motor neurons. In other words, your nervous system starts forgetting how to use certain muscle fibers long before those fibers waste away. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of muscle health, and it changes the way we think about both prevention and treatment. Let's look at the neuroscience behind this. Your ability to contract a muscle begins with the motor cortex, which sends an electrical signal down your spinal cord to a group of motor neurons. Those neurons branch out and stimulate specific muscle fibers, causing them to contract. This process is automatic, but it's also trainable. And tragically, it's also degradable with age or disuse. A study published in the Journal of Physiology, 2019, showed that in older adults, the number of functioning motor units, that is, a motor neuron and the muscle fibers it controls, begins to decline significantly by the 6th decade of life. And this loss doesn't just affect strength, it also reduces precision, coordination, and explosiveness. Have you ever felt like you were tripping more often or your legs weren't responding as quickly on stairs? That's not just muscle. That's a neural lag and is compounded by another factor, the loss of neurotransmitters, particularly acetylcholine, which is essential for muscle contraction, and dopamine, which modulates effort, motivation, and motor control. Low dopamine levels, often associated with aging and stress, can reduce your willingness to move, not just your ability. This creates a feedback loop. Less movement means weaker neural pathways, which means more muscle decay. Here's the big insight. Muscle loss is not just physical decay, it's a kind of neural forgetting. Your brain literally begins to stop recruiting certain muscle fibers because it no longer sees them as relevant. So what can you do about it? The first step is to reawaken these neural pathways through high-quality, low-load activation movements. Even before diving into strength training, research from the Neuroplasticity and Motor Control Lab at McGill University shows that mentally focusing on contracting specific muscles, even without weights, can increase cortical excitability and improve muscle recruitment over time. A simple tool to apply is this. Start your day with 3 to 5 minutes of neuromuscular priming. Choose one key movement, such as standing calf raises, glute squeezes, or slow marching, and perform it deliberately while fully focusing on the muscle you're activating. Combine this with nasal breathing to engage the parasympathetic nervous system and reduce inflammation. What's happening in your brain when you do this is powerful. You're activating neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, specifically in the motor cortex. This lays the groundwork for reconnecting to muscle fibers that may have gone offline due to disuse, injury, or age decline. You can also use visual and auditory cues to boost this effect. Watching a video of someone performing the movement while you mentally rehearse it, known as action observation, has been shown to increase motor cortex activity. Athletes recovering from injury often use this technique to retain motor skills when physical training isn't possible. You can apply it at any age. So here's the takeaway. If you want to keep your muscles, you must first keep the brain's connection to them alive. Think of your nervous system as the software and your muscles as the hardware. If the software stops running updates, the hardware slowly breaks down. Now, we'll get into the foods that fuel this connection, especially the one that sends a direct signal to your muscle cells to stay active and grow. But remember this foundational insight. Strength is a signal, and it starts in your brain. If you walk down the supplement aisle or scroll through fitness advice online, you'll hear the same refrain over and over. Get your protein. And while that advice isn't wrong, it's also not enough. Because not all protein builds muscle. In fact, the body doesn't even recognize protein as a category. What it actually uses are amino acids, and among them, a select few known as essential amino acids, PEAs, are the real drivers of muscle growth. But here's the part most people miss. There's one amino acid that plays a starring role, and it's found in highest concentrations in a very specific type of food. That amino acid is leucine, and the food source is animal-based complete proteins like eggs, fish, and grass-fed beef. Here's what the research shows. Leucine directly activates a molecular switch in your cells called mTOR. We'll dive deeper into this in the next section. When mTOR is activated, your body enters an anabolic state, meaning it gets the biochemical green light to build muscle rather than break it down. Without sufficient leucine, however, this signal is either weak or absent, even if your total daily protein intake looks good on paper. Let's make this tangible. You could eat 25 grams of protein from brown rice and only get about 1.5 grams of leucine. But if you eat 2 whole eggs and a small piece of salmon, you might get 3.5 to 4 grams of leucine, and the mTOR signal will actually fire. So if you've been eating plant-based proteins exclusively and wondering why your muscle strength or recovery isn't improving, it's not just about calories or macros, it's about the anabolic. Now, does this mean plant-based diets can't support muscle growth? Not necessarily, but they require much more careful amino acid planning, often including EAA supplementation to match what animal proteins provide more naturally. Here's a simple tool to apply. Aim for at least 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal to maximize muscle protein synthesis, especially if you're over the age of 50, when the muscle sensitivity to these signals declines, a concept known as anabolic resistance. That might look like 3 eggs plus Greek yogurt, a palm-sized serving of salmon or grass-fed steak, or a whey protein shake with a minimum of 3G added leucine if you're supplementing. And speaking of age, research from Dr. Stuart Phillips's lab at McMaster University shows that older adults need 30 to 40 grams of high-quality protein per meal to trigger the same anabolic response that younger people get with just 20 grams. This means that as you age, not only does your need for protein increase, your need for leucine-rich sources becomes even more important. Here's another insight that surprises many people. Muscle maintenance is not just about what you do in the gym. It's also about what you signal to your body through food. If your meals don't contain the amino acids needed to turn on mTOR, your body may default to catabolism, the breakdown of muscle tissue for energy and recycling. So ask yourself, are you eating meals that merely feed your body? Are meals that instruct it to build and repair muscle? Because food is not just fuel, it's information. And when it comes to preserving muscle, animal-based proteins carry some of the most powerful information your body can use. Now, if you're finding this insight valuable and you want more content that breaks down the neuroscience and physiology of strength, focus, and vitality, consider subscribing. There's a whole world of science-backed tools coming your way, and I'd love to help guide you through it. Now, we're going to explore exactly how the mTOR pathway works, why it's the key to turning on growth mode inside your muscle cells, and how to activate it naturally through daily habits, without triggering negative side effects like inflammation or insulin resistance. Let's zoom in now to the molecular level, because everything we've talked about so far, from your nervous system's activation of muscle to your diet's amino acid profile, leads to one crucial cellular pathway. It's called mTOR, and it's essentially your body's internal switch for muscle growth. mTOR stands for mechanistic target of rapamycin. It's a protein kinase, a type of enzyme that regulates cell growth, metabolism, and regeneration. Think of it like a molecular foreman. When activated, mTOR tells your cells, build muscle, store nutrients, grow. But like any good foreman, mTOR doesn't work unless it gets clear signals. There are 3 major triggers that activate this pathway: mechanical load, resistance training, or any form of muscular tension, insulin and growth factors, signals that energy and nutrients are available, amino acids, especially leucine, as we discussed in the previous section. Here's the fascinating part. mTOR is incredibly responsive, but also highly context dependent. It won't activate if your body is in a stress state, like during illness, sleep deprivation, or caloric restriction. It also won't sustain activity if you're just sort of nourishing yourself. What's happening in your muscle when mTOR is activated is remarkable. Satellite cells, the stem cells of muscle tissue, get recruited to fuse with existing muscle fibers, repairing microscopic damage from exercise and laying down new protein strands. This is the biological foundation of hypertrophy, the process by which muscles grow larger and stronger. But if mTOR isn't activated regularly, your body drifts into a catabolic state, a slow dismantling of lean tissue. This is part of why people lose muscle during long periods of fasting, bed rest, or chronic stress. Without mTOR signaling, the body prioritizes survival over strength. So how do you ensure mTOR is working for you? Here's a simple protocol backed by research from the Journal of Applied Physiology and studies from the University of Maastricht. Consume a leucine-rich meal, 2.5 to 3 g leucine, within 1 to 2 hours post-workout. Strength train with enough intensity to create muscular tension and fatigue. Avoid undereating, especially if you're over 50. Your threshold for mTOR activation is higher, but there's one more key, and it's often overlooked. Timing matters. Research shows that mTOR activity follows a circadian rhythm. It's naturally more responsive earlier in the day, particularly in the late morning to early afternoon. That's when your muscles are more insulin sensitive, your hormones are optimized, and your cellular machinery is primed to respond to anabolic signals. So if you can time your most leucine-rich meal or your workout and post-workout meal to this window, you may get a stronger growth signal. Now, an important caution. Too much mTOR activation, especially when coupled with high insulin and low physical activity, can drive unwanted effects like fat storage, cellular aging, and even increased risk of metabolic disease. It's all about balance. Think of mTOR like fire. Controlled, it warms your system and fuels growth. Uncontrolled, it can cause damage. That's why the real key is pulsing mTOR activation, ideally once or twice a day through well-timed, nutrient-dense meals and strength training with recovery periods in between. This gives your body the growth signals it needs while still allowing cellular cleanup processes like autophagy to occur. Let's bring this back to something you can act on. Try this protocol for 7 days. Eat 30 to 40 grams of high-quality protein at breakfast and lunch, eggs, salmon, lean meats. Perform resistance training at least 3 times with focus on major muscle groups. Time your largest protein meal within 1 hour after your workout. Keep your evening meal lighter in protein and earlier in the evening to support autophagy and sleep quality. You'll be signaling to your body, it's safe to build, it's time to grow. Now, we'll look at what blocks this process, the foods and habits that actively inhibit mTOR or confuse your muscle building signals. Because avoiding the wrong input is just as powerful as applying the right one. If activating muscle growth is like turning on a switch, then certain foods and the way we eat them can either short-circuit that process or block it altogether. Let's start with one of the most common disruptors, chronically elevated blood sugar. When you consume a high glycemic meal, think white bread, sugary cereals, sweetened coffee drinks, or even fruit juice on an empty stomach, your blood glucose spikes rapidly. In response, your pancreas floods the bloodstream with insulin, the hormone responsible for shuttling that glucose into cells. Now, insulin itself isn't the problem. In fact, it plays a role in activating mTOR, as we covered earlier. But when insulin is constantly high, your body starts tuning it out, a condition known as insulin resistance. Here's what the research shows. Insulin resistance blunts mTOR signaling in muscle tissue. This means that even if you eat enough leucine, your muscle cells may not respond properly. They're too inflamed and metabolically confused to receive the signal. This is particularly concerning for anyone over 40 because muscle becomes more insulin resistant with age. And it's even more pronounced in people with visceral fat, sleep issues, or high stress levels. Now pair that with inflammatory foods like seed oils, canola, soybean, corn, ultra-processed meats, and refined carbs, and the problem compounds. These foods create a low-grade inflammatory state in the body, which increases levels of TNF-alpha and IL-6, inflammatory cytokines that actively suppress muscle protein synthesis. Think of it this way. Inflammation is your body's signal that something's wrong. When that signal is constant, the body shifts into protective mode, not growth mode. What's happening in your brain and body when this occurs is subtle but significant. Your hypothalamus, the brain's command center for energy and hormone regulation, detects the inflammation and slows down anabolic processes. Your muscle tissue becomes less responsive to mTOR signaling. And over time, your body prioritizes repair and immune defense over strength or performance. So what can you do to avoid this? Here's a simple behavioral tool. Start your meals with protein and fiber, not starch or sugar. This slows down glucose absorption, blunts insulin spikes, and keeps mTOR signaling more precise and responsive. Example, instead of having oatmeal with fruit first thing in the morning, try 2 eggs with avocado and greens. Then, if needed, a small portion of oats. Or start dinner with a handful of arugula or mixed greens with olive oil and vinegar, followed by your protein. Then add your carbs last. Another effective habit, eliminate or drastically reduce industrial seed oils. These are often hidden in salad dressings, restaurant foods, baked goods, and even protein bars. Swap them for olive oil, avocado oil, or grass-fed butter. Fats that nourish rather than inflame. And here's a neuroscience-backed insight. When you stabilize blood sugar and reduce inflammation, you not only support mTOR signaling, you also improve dopamine sensitivity, which boosts motivation to move, train, and build better habits. Have you noticed how you feel sluggish and unmotivated after a heavy processed meal? That's not just in your head. It's your brain interpreting metabolic stress and downregulating your drive. So if you're trying to build muscle, reclaim energy, and stay sharp, it's not just about what you add to your diet, it's also about what you remove. Because you can't out-supplement or out-train a broken metabolic signal. But when it's chronically high, especially at night, it actively opposes muscle protein synthesis and promotes muscle breakdown. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism showed that just one night of poor sleep reduced testosterone by up to 15% the following day in men, and lowered growth hormone pulses in both men and women. These are 2 critical anabolic hormones. Without them, your muscle recovery slows and your energy tanks. What's happening in your brain is this. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system that governs your stress response, goes into high alert. This suppresses deep sleep, particularly slow wave sleep, which is the very phase when muscle repair, memory consolidation, and hormone release peak. It's like trying to build a house during a storm. The workers are there, the materials are there, but the environment isn't stable enough to proceed. So what's the solution? If this insight is hitting home and you're seeing just how interconnected your metabolism, brain, and muscle health really are, consider subscribing to the channel. We often think of muscle growth as something that happens in the gym, under the weights, during the reps. But the truth is, you don't grow in the gym. You grow in recovery. And this is where the science gets both fascinating and often neglected. Muscle growth is an anabolic process, meaning it builds tissue. But anabolism is parasympathetically driven. In other words, it requires your nervous system to be in a rest and repair mode, not a fight or flight state. So here's the question. What happens if you train hard, eat well, but your stress is high and your sleep is poor? Your body may get the raw materials, but it can't allocate resources to build. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, becomes elevated. In short bursts, cortisol isn't the enemy. Here are 3 evidence-backed tools to shift your body into an anabolic recovery state. Create a wind down window before sleep. 60 to 90 minutes of low stimulation time. This means dim lights, no screens, and light stretching or reading. According to neuroscience research out of Stanford, reducing visual and cognitive stimulation before bed enhances melatonin release and improves slow-wave sleep. Use breath work or physiological sighs just 1 to 2 minutes before sleep or after training. A physiological sigh, 2 inhales through the nose, followed by a long exhale, is one of the fastest ways to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and drop cortisol. It also improves heart rate variability, a marker of recovery readiness. Time your last meal wisely. Eating too close to bed, especially carb-heavy or high-fat meals, can impair deep sleep and disrupt overnight hormonal rhythms. Try this. Finish eating at least 2 to 3 hours before bed and make your evening meal lighter and lower in protein. This helps prioritize digestion earlier and cellular repair later. Another powerful, underrated concept, morning sunlight. Just 10 minutes of sunlight within 30 minutes of waking anchors your circadian rhythm, making it easier to fall asleep at night and optimizing your cortisol rhythm. When this rhythm is well regulated, your body naturally enters recovery mode more efficiently and builds muscle more effectively. Here's the big takeaway. You can train perfectly and eat optimally, but if your nervous system never downshifts, your muscles won't grow. In fact, some of the most common signs of stalled muscle gains, chronic soreness, poor energy, fat gain, and mood dips, are actually signs of under recovery, not under training. So think of recovery not as rest, but as an active process that demands structure. It's where your body integrates all the signals you've sent through diet, movement, and behavior and decides, should we rebuild or retreat? Let's end with something that might surprise you. Because up until now, we've talked about amino acids, hormones, sleep, and inflammation, all very physiological. But none of it fully works without this. Your mindset, the beliefs you hold about yourself and your body, changes your biology. This isn't metaphor, it's neuroscience. In a 2007 study from Harvard, hotel workers were told that their daily job, cleaning rooms, changing linens, walking hallways, met the Surgeon General's recommendations for exercise. Over 4 weeks, these workers did not change their behavior at all, but they experienced significant improvements in weight, blood pressure, and body fat percentage. Why? Because their beliefs about what they were doing changed. What's happening in your brain here is called top-down modulation, the ability of your thoughts and beliefs governed by your prefrontal cortex to influence downstream physiological responses. When you consistently believe that your body is growing stronger, more capable, more resilient, your brain releases dopamine and endorphins, lowers cortisol, and enhances mTOR activity and even immune regulation. You become biologically more anabolic. Now let's apply this to muscle. There's a critical shift that happens when you stop thinking of building muscle as a goal and start seeing it as part of your identity, part of who you are. Not, I'm trying to work out more, but I'm the kind of person who trains to stay strong. This identity-based approach, drawn from behavioral psychology, is more effective than willpower or motivation alone. Research from Stanford and MIT shows that when you frame behaviors around identity, I am versus I should, you engage deeper areas of the brain involved in long-term decision-making and habit consolidation, particularly the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So what does this look like practically? Here's a protocol you can apply today. Choose an identity, not just a goal. Instead of saying, I want to gain 5 pounds of muscle, shift to, I'm becoming someone who trains consistently, eats for strength, and rests to grow. Tie your behavior to a value. Ask yourself, why do I want to be strong? For many, it's deeper than appearance. It's about being able to protect loved ones, stay active for decades, or feel confident and alive. Anchor to that. Use small wins as identity proof. Every time you prep a protein-rich meal, every time you stretch before bed, every time you choose movement over distraction, you're casting a vote for the person you're becoming. And here's one of the most empowering neuroscience insights I can share. Neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to rewire itself, doesn't stop at 25 or 40 or 60. It responds to repetition and emotion. The more emotionally meaningful a behavior is, and the more consistently you perform it, the more your brain will say, this matters, keep this, make it automatic. This is where muscle meets mindset. You are not just lifting weights, you are lifting your biology, rep by rep, thought by thought. You are telling your brain and body, we are adapting, we are not done, we are building. So if you've ever felt like your muscle is slipping away, like your strength is vanishing, and you're watching it happen in slow motion, remember this, it's not too late. It's never too late, but it will require consistency and, more importantly, a shift in identity. So let's bring this all together. We started with the question, what if your muscles are vanishing, not from age, but from something missing? So not just missing protein, not just missing exercise, but missing one food that powers your gut, fuels your mitochondria, reduces inflammation, improves recovery, and quietly turns on the machinery of growth and resilience. Fermented, fiber-rich, polyphenol-packed plants, foods like kimchi, kefir, sauerkraut, berries, and dark leafy greens. Not trendy, not glamorous, but profoundly powerful. Because here's what the research shows, and what most people never hear. Your muscle health is not just a function of what you lift or how much protein you eat. It's a reflection of how well your entire system communicates, from your microbiome to your brain, from your hormones to your habits. Let's recap the 6 key insights. Muscle loss isn't just about aging, it's about systemic inflammation, often driven by gut imbalance and nutrient deficiencies. Fermented, fiber-rich plant foods feed your microbiome, which enhances amino acid absorption, lowers inflammation, and improves hormonal signals like testosterone and IGF-1. Without bioavailable leucine, especially post-exercise, muscles can't trigger protein synthesis. Timing and quality of protein matter. Chronic inflammation impairs mTOR and activates muscle breakdown, making gut health and polyphenols crucial tools for reversing the trend occurs when you grow, and that requires parasympathetic dominance, high-quality sleep, and stress regulation through breathwork and light exposure. Your mindset shapes your muscle biology. Identity-based habits, emotionally anchored values, and repetition drive long-term change through neuroplasticity. The central message here isn't about a miracle food, it's about creating a system, an ecosystem where your body can grow. That ecosystem includes your nutrition, your nervous system, your belief structures, your routines, your environment. And the good news, you don't need to overhaul everything. You just need to start with one habit, one food, one belief. So here's my challenge to you. Tonight, add one fermented or deeply colored plant to your dinner. It could be kimchi, pickled onions, arugula, purple cabbage, or even a scoop of sauerkraut. Give your microbiome something to work with. Let it start to shift. Then sleep with intention, breathe slowly, stretch for 5 minutes. Remind yourself, I am someone who builds. Because if you do that day after day, your biology will follow. If this message resonated with you, if you feel like you learned something, not just about your muscles, but about your mind, your body, and what's possible, I invite you to like this video, leave a comment about the food or habit you're committing to, and subscribe to join a growing community of people who are taking science and using it to transform their lives. This is just the beginning. Let's keep building one cell, one thought, one rep at a time.